I want you to imagine standing in this massive, high-tech global control room. Like half the screens on the wall are glitching out. The physical foundation beneath your feet is literally beginning to shake. And the operating manual sitting on the consoles, they're just being rewritten in real time by some automated system.
Yeah, it's a really disorienting image, but honestly, it captures the exact geopolitical landscape we're analyzing right now.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're watching the legacy systems of global power, so military, economic, political, essentially short-circuit and reconfigure themselves, like, all at the same time.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We have a pretty complex mission for you today. We're looking at honestly, a dense stack of intelligence covering geopolitics, economics, and technology, all focusing on the first week of July 2026.
Right. And the goal here is to really step back from that daily news cycle. We want to uncover the structural forces, the weird paradoxes, and the hidden mechanisms that are actually shaping your world.
Yeah, but before we jump in, I do need to make our framework explicitly clear. The sources we are unpacking today cover highly polarized and politically charged subjects.
Very charged.
Right. From U.S. politics and the Trump administration to the ongoing, really intense conflicts in the Middle East. And we are taking absolutely no political sides here. Our mission is solely to impartially report and analyze the ideas contained in the original source material.
Yeah, we are not endorsing any specific viewpoints at all. We're just here to convey the data and, explore the underlying logic.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the global operating system, you kind of have to look at how a state enforces its power, right? And historically, that always meant physical manpower.
Boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Giant human-operated fleets.
Exactly. But the intelligence indicates this sudden, massive structural shift toward the automation of conflict. And the raw numbers from South Korea, they illustrate this perfectly.
Yeah, those numbers are wild.
They really are. They're initiating this push to establish a force of 500,000 quote-unquote drone warriors. And they plan to produce 11,000 drones just this year to deploy along the North Korean border.
Which is just staggering scale.
Right. Like, how does a military command structure even begin to integrate 11,000 autonomous units? It completely changes the basic logistics of border defense.
What's fascinating here is that drones are no longer just, supplementary tools for surveillance. They are the central mechanism of engagement now.
Right.
You aren't just giving 11,000 soldiers a joystick. You are integrating swarm logic into your actual military doctrine. And this is a global pivot. It's not just South Korea.
Yeah, look at the UK.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the UK, outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer committed £15 billion for defense modernization. And an entire third of that funding is earmarked specifically for drones and autonomous weapons.
Third. That's huge. And we're seeing the real-world application of this right now in the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine launched this massive swarm of drones directly at Moscow.
And Russia claims to have intercepted 400 of them.
Right, 400. But even if you factor in those interceptions, Vladimir Putin actually admitted that these strikes are causing severe fuel shortages in 56 different regions. Think about that. A sovereign nation is experiencing regional energy crises because of cheap, unmanned aircraft.
Yeah, and this fundamentally alters what military strategists call the cost-exchange ratio.
Okay, explain that a bit.
So it's the economic metric of what it costs you to attack versus what it costs your enemy to defend. You don't need a multi-billion-dollar stealth bomber program anymore to cripple a superpower's infrastructure.
You just need a lot of cheap drones.
Exactly. You just need a critical mass of cheap autonomous hardware to completely overwhelm their legacy air defenses.
I'm struggling to grasp how a nation even defends against that math. I mean, it feels like warfare has transitioned from a high-stakes game of chess where every human piece is, carefully moved into a hyper-fast video game played with self-replicating swarms.
That's a really good way to put it.
But if the barrier to entry for air superiority is now just mass-producing cheap drones, doesn't this render traditional borders and physical airspace practically indefensible?
Well, it renders them kinetically indefensible, yes.
Yeah.
You can no longer rely on, shooting a physical projectile at an incoming physical projectile.
That's just too expensive.
Way too expensive. Militaries are being forced to adapt through electronic warfare. So jamming communication frequencies, spoofing GPS coordinates, or using directed energy weapons like lasers.
Because lasers have a near zero cost per shot.
Right. But the traditional concept of a border as a hard physical line you guard with artillery,
Hmm.
that is dissolving rapidly.
And that dissolution points to an even deeper structural change, I think. Because if autonomous technology and intelligence algorithms are the primary tools of modern warfare now, then the companies providing the cloud computing infrastructure are effectively operating as defense contractors.
Yeah, the physical weapon is really just the terminal point of a massive digital supply chain.
Yeah.
You cannot process the intelligence required for modern warfare without massive civilian commercial data centers.
Which is causing a profound geopolitical reckoning within the civilian tech sector itself. Which brings us to this crazy story about the resignation of a Microsoft critical environment technician in Italy.
Oh, Noor. Yeah.
Yeah, known publicly as Noor. So after 994 days on the job, Noor sent this email to thousands of European colleagues, directly accusing Microsoft of powering Israel's war in Gaza through its Azure cloud platform.
Right. And Noor cited a really specific investigative report in that email.
Yeah, revealing that Israel's intelligence unit, 8200, used Microsoft's Netherlands data center to store 11,500 terabytes of intercepted Palestinian audio.
11,500 terabytes.
That is roughly 200 million hours of audio housed on everyday civilian commercial infrastructure.
This raises an important question regarding corporate complicity in the modern era. The boundary between the technology sector and the state apparatus is just vanishing.
I look at this through the lens of World War II. Like if you worked in a WWII munitions plant, you smelled the cordite, you felt the weight of the artillery shells in your hands, you knew exactly what your output was designed to do.
It was visceral.
Exactly. But today, if you're an IT technician, your daily physical reality is checking cooling systems, replacing server racks, maybe monitoring power grids. You are managing a completely invisible assembly line.
Yeah, and workers like Noor are realizing, like long after the fact, that the architecture they maintain is a crucial component of global conflicts.
And governments are highly aware of how crucial that architecture is, which means they are treating tech companies as extensions of state security now. Look at the recent developments with Anthropic.
Why, the AI company?
Yeah, the U.S. government had previously banned non-U.S. users from accessing Anthropic's Fable and Mythos-AI models.
Because of security vulnerabilities.
Right. And they only lifted the ban after specific safeguards were implemented. I mean, we're talking about frontier AI here. These are the absolute bleeding-edge models, systems capable of highly sophisticated reasoning.
And the government proved it holds a literal kill switch over global access to this technology. They can just shut it off.
But the tech executives, they aren't just passive providers in this either. They're getting deeply entangled in the geopolitical and legal fallout, like in Indonesia.
Oh, the Gojek founder case.
Yeah, the former education minister, Nadiem Makarim, who is also the founder of the massive tech company Gojek, was just sentenced to 10 years in prison.
10 years.
10 years. And the conviction was for corruption involving the procurement of Google Chromebooks for the education system.
Which really highlights how technology procurement, even for something as supposedly benign as public education laptops, is now this high-stakes arena for political leverage, state funds, and geopolitical influence.
Yeah.
The engineers and the executives are finding themselves directly in the crosshairs of state power.
Which naturally forces us to look at the people wielding that state power, right? All these data centers, the cloud infrastructure, the autonomous drone swarms, they ultimately answer to human leaders. But our intelligence stack shows that the nature of executive power and how these leaders operate is warping in really unprecedented ways.
Totally. We're seeing a complete breakdown of historical norms regarding how power is centralized, how it's projected, and in some cases, how the individuals in power are personally leveraging their positions.
Yeah, so let's look at the U.S. The Supreme Court just issued incredibly complex rulings regarding presidential authority. They struck down President Trump's executive order that attempted to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented migrants.
Right, a check on executive power.
But yet, simultaneously, they significantly expanded his authority to fire federal regulators. They carved out a specific exception only for the Federal Reserve's Lisa Cook to protect the central bank's independence. But otherwise, it is a massive reshaping of the administrative state.
Because the expansion of the ability to fire regulators consolidates immense power within the executive branch. It allows the president to dismantle or redirect federal agencies far more easily than before.
Right.
But the implications of that power, becomes so much more complex when you look at the president's personal financial architecture alongside it.
Oh, the financial disclosures. Yeah, the 2025 financial disclosures revealed that President Trump reported $1.4 billion in income solely from his family's cryptocurrency ventures.
$1.4 billion.
Yeah, that includes nearly $800 million from World Liberty Financial and over $630 million just from selling meme coins.
Wow.
And this is occurring at the exact same time his administration is aggressively easing crypto regulations and federal rules for stablecoins, which, are cryptocurrencies designed to be pegged to traditional assets like the dollar to avoid price volatility.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see traditional ethical guardrails just evaporating. I mean, you have a head of state personally generating over $1 billion from a volatile digital asset class while simultaneously holding the executive authority to deregulate that exact industry.
And reshape the agencies overseeing it.
Exactly. Post-Watergate norms regarding conflicts of interest at the highest levels of global power are being completely redefined right now.
And this redefinition of leadership isn't just a Western phenomenon either. It is playing out dramatically in the Middle East right now, where physical security is literally dictating who can actually govern.
Right.
So a fragile ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran faltered after a skirmish in the Strait of Hormuz. But internally, Iran is grappling with a profound leadership vacuum.
Because of the assassination.
Right, following the assassination of their 86-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
The sudden end to a nearly 4-decade rule creates a massive generational shift in a highly volatile region.
And the state funeral is expected to draw over 10 million mourners. But the detail that really clarifies the new reality of geopolitical power is that his son, the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is reportedly absent from his own father's state funeral.
Because of reported security threats from Israel.
Yes. It is a stunning paradox. You have back-channel diplomacy actively occurring. I mean, Israel and Lebanon just signed their first formal diplomatic agreement in 43 years, pledging to disarm Hezbollah.
Notably without Hezbollah's signature on the actual document.
Right, minor detail. But yet the actual heads of state are forced to govern from the shadows.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? We have Andy Burnham in the UK planning to decentralize power away from London by creating a quote-unquote number 10 North. We have a U.S. president operating as a crypto billionaire while reshaping the regulatory state. We have a supreme leader who cannot physically attend a public funeral of historical magnitude.
It's all connected.
It seems like the concept of the centralized, highly visible head of state is just fracturing.
It really is. The traditional centralized leader relied on 3 pillars.
Yeah.
A monopoly of information, a monopoly of force, and physical invulnerability.
Wow.
And those pillars have just collapsed.
Wow. Yeah.
Information is highly decentralized now. Force is being automated and outsourced to commercial cloud providers like we talked about. And physical security is nearly impossible to guarantee in an era of precision intelligence. Leaders are transitioning from visible public figures into these hidden managers of complex automated systems.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most jarring section of our intelligence stack today. As these political and technological systems reshape themselves, the global economy is just bifurcating.
Splitting in 2.
Yeah. We are seeing a frictionless, booming digital economy completely detached from a physical world that is experiencing severe structural failure.
I mean, if you were to assess the world strictly through the lens of global stock indices right now, you would assume we were in an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity.
It's insane. Despite the skirmishes in the Strait of Hormuz and the energy crises in Europe, global stock markets just recorded their best quarter in 6 years.
Best in 6 years.
Japan's Nikkei index surged 37%. South Korea's KOSPI index jumped 68%. And this explosion of capital is being driven by a 200% surge in semiconductor exports. Companies like Samsung and SK Hynix are pouring $600 billion into new chip manufacturing facilities.
Because they are manufacturing the physical substrate that powers the artificial intelligence and the autonomous drone swarms we discussed earlier, the digital infrastructure requires immense capital, and the markets are just heavily rewarding that transition.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Contrast that semiconductor boom with legacy companies that are actually tethered to physical manufacturing. Volkswagen is reportedly laying off 100,000 employees.
That's a sixth of their entire workforce.
Yes, and they're closing 4 major factories in Germany. They are failing to transition to electric vehicles quickly enough while just being squeezed by tariffs and energy costs.
And Nike, too.
Right. Nike's revenue is plummeting, and their recent billion-dollar profit is basically an accounting illusion. It's heavily reliant on a $986 million government tariff refund rather than actual consumer growth.
The friction of the physical world, so supply chains, energy costs, raw materials, it's crushing legacy models.
Mm.
And it's not just corporate manufacturing either. The physical environment itself and social fabrics are under extreme duress.
Yeah, the physical world crises are piling up. Venezuela just suffered a devastating earthquake that left 2,295 people dead, requiring 900 U.S. military personnel just to assist a collapsing healthcare infrastructure.
Awful.
And Europe is enduring a deadly, record-shattering heat wave with temperatures reaching 41.7 degrees Celsius in Germany.
Which is unheard of for them.
And the demographic strain is forcing extreme policy shifts, too. Spain just granted a massive amnesty program to over 1 million undocumented migrants, basically simply to inject labor into a straining physical economy.
You really have to look at how this economic paradox impacts you directly as a listener. Your digital life, the devices you rely on, the frontier AI models transforming your industry, the semiconductor stocks potentially buoying your retirement portfolio. All of that operates in a frictionless environment of rapid growth.
Yeah.
But your physical reality, the price of groceries, the stability of the climate, the viability of legacy industries employing millions of people, that is fraught with friction, decay, and instability.
I mean, a micromobility company like Lime, literally renting out electric scooters, can execute a $167 million IPO while the actual physical streets those scooters ride on are buckling under extreme weather and economic strain.
The global economy is heavily incentivizing the digital ghost while the physical machine breaks down.
Man, we have mapped a tremendous amount of structural change today. We started by examining how the necessity for human soldiers is being rapidly replaced by automated drone swarms, which radically alters the mathematics of defense.
And we explored how the commercial data centers processing the intelligence for those swarms are turning civilian IT workers into unwitting defense contractors.
Right. We analyzed how the leaders managing these technologies are operating under entirely new paradigms from, unprecedented financial deregulation at the executive level to supreme leaders governing from secure, hidden locations.
When we broke down the profound economic disconnect between a semiconductor industry printing wealth and a physical world struggling with legacy collapses, natural disasters, and migrant crises.
That's a lot.
It is. But if we synthesize all of this, it leaves us with a really critical realization. We have spent this deep dive evaluating how human leaders leverage AI, autonomous weapons, and global markets to maintain and project their power.
Right.
But as predictive algorithms become inextricably woven into our military defense grids, our cloud infrastructure, and our financial exchanges, we have to ask what happens when the latency is removed entirely.
What do you mean?
Well, what happens the day a global crisis is triggered, not by a human leader's flawed geopolitical strategy, but by an automated algorithmic response that perfectly executes its programming, and no human possesses the necessary speed or access to switch it off.
Wow, that high-tech control room we visualized at the beginning, the real danger isn't that the manuals are being rewritten. The danger is that the automated systems no longer require us to read them at all. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unseen forces shaping your world, and we will catch you next time.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this baseline expectation of precision.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Like you expect it to be practically like engineering.
Exactly. You fall, you break your arm, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line right there on the black film. And the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Right. It's broken or not broken. It is a completely clean binary reality.
Which is incredibly comforting, psychologically speaking. We have this deep need for things to be visible, to be neatly categorized.
Yeah, because if we can name it and see it, we really believe we can fix it.
But then, you step into a world like neurodevelopment or complex trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless, and the machinery we rely on just doesn't work on the problem we are actually facing.
Right. You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
And that feeling, that deep, unsettling tension between wanting a clean diagnosis and having to navigate a really messy reality, that is exactly where we are living right now.
Yeah.
On a global scale.
Yeah, we are definitely looking at a deeply murky diagnostic landscape today.
We really are. So today we're tearing into over 40 different articles, policy papers, and academic journals. This is all curated by the Weekly Geopolitical Lens.
And it is a massive stack. We are covering everything from regional warfare and the 250th anniversary of the U.S. to AI deployment and major cultural shifts.
Right, and a glaring theme is just staring us right in the face through all of this. It's the collision between the models we build and the reality we actually live in.
That tension is literally everywhere in these materials. We are constantly trying to force the physical world into these neat binary X-rays, economic models, geopolitical alliances.
And the world is aggressively refusing to cooperate, which means we have to ask you, the listener, a very uncomfortable question today. How often are you actually interacting with reality, and how often are you just interacting with an illusion we built to comfort ourselves?
It's a tough question to sit with.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. But before we get into the mechanics, I do want to clarify our mission for this deep dive.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yeah. We are covering highly charged political and geopolitical topics today, domestic and international. And our goal here is absolutely not to take a side.
No, not at all. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, left-wing, right-wing, whatever, presented by these authors.
Exactly. We are just impartially unpacking the claims, the arguments, and the data.
Yeah.
We want you to clearly see the forces shaping the world right now without us putting a thumb on the scale.
We are just looking under the hood at the mechanics, and when you look across these 40-plus articles, a very distinct pattern emerges.
What's the main through line you're seeing?
Basically, we are witnessing the collapse of the old unipolar world, this system that dominated the post-Cold War era, and we're seeing the chaotic, highly unpredictable birth of a multipolar reality.
Because the old models simply do not map onto the new terrain anymore.
Exactly. They are completely failing.
Let's start right there with the breakdown of this unipolar illusion. There's a fascinating thesis presented here by Olivier Roynard. He talks about what he calls total hybrid war.
Yeah, Roynard's thesis is foundational for understanding this whole collision.
His core argument is that the unipolar post-Cold War order wasn't just satisfied with having the biggest military. It actually attempted to dictate the entire model of human existence.
Right. It wanted to define morality, international law, macroeconomic policy, even the boundaries of what was considered acceptable political discourse.
And because of that massive ambition, the very nature of war evolved. It is no longer episodic. It doesn't just start with a declaration and end with a treaty anymore.
No, it is continuous. It operates through information campaigns, weaponizing financial systems, using NGOs, academia, digital platforms.
Under this model, peace is no longer defined as like a tense coexistence between different sovereign states. Peace has become completely synonymous with normalization.
Right, which essentially just means forcing everyone to conform to the dominant model.
He makes this brilliant philosophical distinction, actually, between science and scientism. And this explains exactly how modern Western governance handles it when their model breaks down.
Yeah, I love this distinction. Because true science is fundamentally humble, right?
Exactly. It looks at reality, forms a hypothesis, and if reality proves it wrong, science revises the theory.
But scientism, which Roynard argues, has basically taken over global governance, operates in reverse. Scientism protects the existing models and attempts to reshape reality to fit the theory.
So if reality doesn't fit the governance model, say a population resists a policy or an economic theory fails, the bureaucracy doesn't think their model is flawed.
No, they dismiss the reality itself. They call it disinformation or extremism, or just say the population is acting irrationally.
And the practical result is that governments end up ruling through abstract indicators. They govern via data scenarios and risk algorithms.
Totally detached from the lived physical experience of the actual people on the ground.
But I want to push back on this a little, or at least explore the actual danger here. Because isn't all governance fundamentally just an attempt to manage reality?
How do you mean? Well, you need indicators, right? You need economic data and risk assessments to run a massive modern country. What is the tangible danger of this scientism if it's ultimately just a management tool?
The danger is what Roynard identifies as the anthropological concern. It literally changes how the state views the human being.
Because we become data points.
Exactly. When you rely entirely on these models, humans are reduced from living, breathing persons with agency to just individuals within a demographic, and finally to algorithmic data profiles.
So the governance system manages populations exactly like it manages data sets.
Right. And doing that actively degrades the things that make us human. Our moral judgment, our historical memory, our capacity for deep relationships.
The model replaces human character with behavioral prediction. We are being managed as variables, not governed as citizens.
And the fiction happens when those variables refuse to comply, which is happening everywhere.
Yeah, we can see this theoretical shift playing out very physically right now. Middle powers are openly rejecting this unipolar model. Look at the June 2026 ASEAN-Russia summit in Kazan. Oh, that summit is a masterclass in multipolarity in action.
It really is. Despite intense coordinated Western sanctions on Russia, 9 of the 11 ASEAN heads of state traveled to Kazan to meet directly with Putin.
And they adopted declarations that explicitly affirmed a just and democratic multipolar world order.
Which is a direct, if highly diplomatic, rejection of unipolar dominance. And what is so revealing is the motivation here.
Right, it's not ideological.
Not at all. It isn't about ASEAN suddenly adopting Russian political ideology.
Yeah.
It is pure, calculated strategic diversification.
They are looking at the U.S.-China rivalry, looking at the fragility of these unipolar models, and deciding to build their own parallel architecture.
Precisely. For ASEAN countries, especially gateways like Vietnam and Indonesia, engaging with Russia is about sovereign autonomy. They are refusing to be forced into a binary choice.
The trade data perfectly illustrates this too. Bilateral trade between ASEAN and Russia actually grew to $25.4 billion by 2024.
But the composition of that trade is fascinating. It is almost entirely driven by ASEAN importing Russian energy and fertilizers. Russian imports of ASEAN manufactured goods actually declined.
So it's a completely structural imbalance.
Yeah. ASEAN is taking what they absolutely need to survive, energy and food security, while minimizing their exposure on the export side.
And they were doing this despite massive friction from Western financial sanctions. It creates immense barriers for banking and shipping.
Russia has proposed using national currencies to bypass sanctions, right?
They have, but ASEAN is still too deeply integrated into the U.S. dollar system for that to work seamlessly just yet. However, the critical takeaway is the political will to find a workaround.
Right, like Singapore participating. Singapore actually imposed its own sanctions on Russia in 2022, yet there they are at the summit.
Exactly. It shows intense pragmatism. They view sanctions as narrow economic tools, not a moral imperative to sever all physical ties.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates the absolute limits of unipolar financial sanctions. You simply cannot freeze a resource-rich country out of the global model anymore.
The physical world is just too interconnected. Middle powers will find the plumbing necessary to secure energy and food.
That pragmatic rewiring, ignoring old models to secure raw physical needs, isn't just happening in Asia. It is completely tearing up the geopolitical map in the Middle East.
Yes, the aftermath of the recent Iran war has birthed a brand new, highly informal regional alignment. It makes the old models look entirely obsolete.
We are looking at a new Saudi-led axis operating completely outside the traditional Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, framework.
This new strategic bloc includes Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey.
But the most revealing detail about this new model is who isn't there. The glaring exclusion of the United Arab Emirates.
Which tells us that the concept of unified Gulf security, the old GCC unity, is fundamentally dead.
It is entirely fractured. The strategic realities of Saudi Arabia and the UAE have fundamentally diverged.
The Saudi camp is attempting to establish a broad, heavily leveraged regional coalition. They want to balance against both Iranian influence and Israeli military action through complex diplomacy.
And look at who they brought in. Pakistan, specifically for the strategic value of its nuclear deterrent, and Qatar.
Right, a country Saudi Arabia literally blockaded a few years ago. But Qatar proved invaluable as a diplomatic mediator and financial conduit during the conflict.
So Saudi Arabia is building a coalition based on leverage, not just tribal affinity. And the UAE is playing a totally different game.
The UAE continues to aggressively embrace the Abraham Accords with Israel. They view Iran as the ultimate existential military threat.
They have zero interest in diplomatic normalization with Tehran. They prefer a hardline containment approach.
So you have two fiercely competing visions of security architecture. And this brings us back to the overarching theme of the illusions we build.
Because sitting right in the middle of this is the reality of Gaza. And the physical reality of Gaza is being heavily obscured by a political narrative model.
A narrative that both sides of the conflict are actively colluding to maintain.
This is one of the most counterintuitive insights from the materials. Jazer Abu Musa published a piece in Foreign Affairs titled The End of Hamas.
The prevailing narrative we consume daily is that Hamas is this persistent, constantly regenerating threat.
But Abu Musa details how, in reality, Hamas has suffered a total, irreversible institutional collapse.
He lays out a staggering list of systemic failures. Militarily, the leadership structure has been entirely decapitated. Sinwar, Deif, Haniyeh, all dead.
The physical infrastructure, the tunnels, weapons factories systematically dismantled.
Financially, they are bankrupt. They lost foreign funding from Qatar and Iran to the point where they can't even issue stipends to their 49,000 employees.
Politically, whatever leadership remains is paralyzed by internal factionalism. One camp wants closer ties with Iran, another wants to capitulate to Sunni Arab states just to survive.
And crucially, their social control has collapsed. They face unprecedented domestic opposition inside Gaza from rival armed militias and clans.
Public support has plummeted. Abu Musa's core thesis is that Hamas, as a viable military entity or governing force, is finished.
But here is where the model overrides reality. Both Hamas and the Israeli government are artificially pumping oxygen into the Hamas threat narrative.
For Hamas, the motivation is obvious, right? If they admit total defeat, they lose whatever microscopic sliver of political relevance they have left.
They have to project strength.
But why would the Israeli government, particularly Netanyahu's administration, actively pretend their enemy is stronger than they actually are?
Because that specific narrative model serves a vital political function for the Netanyahu government.
How so?
If Hamas is portrayed as a perpetually looming threat, it provides the legal and political justification for maintaining permanent military positions deep inside Gaza.
Oh, I see. It justifies delaying reconstruction.
Exactly. It necessitates indefinite military administration, and it allows the government to indefinitely postpone any serious negotiations regarding Palestinian statehood.
It is a mutually beneficial political illusion. The model serves the survival of the leadership on both sides, even if it ignores the decimated reality on the ground.
And while this narrative game justifies permanent occupation, we have to look at the inaction of the broader Arab world.
Right. There were massive waves of public outrage across Arab capitals regarding Gaza, yet the Arab League did absolutely nothing.
Rami G. Khoury's analysis explains this paralysis perfectly. He argues you can't understand their inaction without looking at post-colonial dependence.
The vast majority of these Arab states rely heavily on the U.S. and European defense contractors for military hardware, intelligence, and financial assistance.
Engaging in meaningful confrontation with the U.S.-Israel partnership is economically and militarily suicidal for them.
But there is also a deeply cynical domestic dynamic at play, according to Khoury. These governments prioritize regime survival over the popular will of their citizens.
They look at public anger over Gaza and don't see a call to action. They see a threat to their own stability.
They fear that engaging in regional instability could eventually turn against their own rule. So they operate purely in symbolism. Fiery condemnations, a few field hospitals, but no actual leverage.
And because the Arab League requires strict consensus, it essentially guarantees structural paralysis.
And this delusion, the idea that a state can cleanly manage a conflict through performative agreements, is spreading beyond Gaza. Look at the June 26, 2026 Declaration of Intent between Lebanon and Israel.
Right, brokered in Washington. Critics in Lebanon are explicitly calling it an Oslo trap.
What exactly are the mechanics of this trap?
The comparison to Oslo is profound. Critics argue Israel historically uses loosely worded interim agreements to maintain military freedom while setting impossible conditions for the other side.
And in this agreement, the framework demands the Lebanese state deploy its army to forcibly disarm Hezbollah in the south.
Which is a demand completely disconnected from physical reality.
The Lebanese armed forces are severely underfunded and fractured. Attempting that wouldn't bring peace. It would instantly spark a catastrophic civil war.
Exactly. The agreement forces Lebanon to act like a fully capable sovereign state precisely where its state capacity is weakest.
Furthermore, they use a declaration of intent to bypass Lebanon's constitutional safeguards, which require parliament ratification for binding treaties.
So they engineered a model mathematically guaranteed to fail. And when Lebanon inevitably fails to disarm Hezbollah, Israel will have the prefabricated legal justification for the next military incursion.
And Washington's policies compound this complexity. The materials analyze Trump's Iran policy during his second term, specifically a memorandum of understanding signed with Tehran.
Critics point out a glaring contradiction. The MOU reportedly unfreezes billions in trapped Iranian assets.
And historically, those unfrozen funds are funneled to the IRGC and subsequently to proxies like Hezbollah.
So Washington demands Lebanon disarm Hezbollah while simultaneously executing an economic policy that unlocks the pipelines Hezbollah needs to rearm.
It is a policy model completely at war with itself. It severely undermines any hope for Lebanese sovereignty.
That idea that leaders genuinely believe they can precisely manage these explosive contradictions is the same fatal miscalculation happening in South Asia.
Let's look at the May 2025 four-day war between India and Pakistan. This was easily the most serious military confrontation between the two since 1971.
Triggered by a horrific terror attack that killed 26 Indian tourists in
The
Pahalgam,
speed of escalation was terrifying. Deep territory airstrikes within days, and India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty.
which governs the flow of rivers into Pakistan. It's essentially threatening the agricultural lifeblood of a downstream nation, a massive escalation.
But beyond geopolitics, the analysis highlights a technological shift. The defense supply chains have fundamentally shifted.
Yes, Pakistan relied heavily on Chinese and Turkish defense tech, like drone swarms and electronic warfare. India utilized French aerospace tech and Israeli precision hardware.
It was a stark showcase of multipolar warfare.
Yeah.
But the truly dangerous part, the psychological lesson both leadership structures took away, was entirely domestic.
Both governments reaped massive political rewards from the violence.
The Pakistani military establishment recovered nationalist goodwill amidst an economic crisis, and India's ruling party secured a massive bump in the polls just by projecting strength.
And that creates a highly intoxicating, deeply flawed model. They mistakenly conclude they can routinely engage in high-tech kinetic warfare without hitting the nuclear threshold.
They believe they've mastered the limited war. But historical data shows every conflict since 2016 features heavier payloads and deeper strikes.
They are inching perilously closer to a catastrophic nuclear exchange while operating on a model that says they are safely managing a border dispute.
We see that same dangerous illusion in the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. The materials detail a recent 40-day drone campaign by Ukraine targeting Russian oil refineries.
On paper, degrading the enemy's macroeconomic engine seems like a foolproof strategy, but does it work in reality?
According to the analysis, the impact is severe but highly localized. Critical fuel shortages in Crimea and border regions.
But Russia's core oil and gas export engine remains astonishingly intact. In fact, their treasury is being bolstered by unexpected petrodollars.
Because geopolitical tension in the Middle East, specifically Iran, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, drove up global energy prices.
The global market dynamics actually insulated Russia from the localized damage inflicted by the drones.
So the theoretical model of economic strangulation isn't breaking Putin's resolve at all.
Not in the slightest. He remains aggressively defiant. He hasn't scaled back his war aims. He's expanded them, demanding absolute Ukrainian neutrality and claiming Novorossiya.
He can operate with his confidence because domestic stability in Russia is holding. For the average citizen, the economic friction is manageable compared to the 1990s.
Meanwhile, the physical reality for Ukraine is incredibly grim. Their lifeline of Western funding is drying up.
The U.S. pulled back its blank check support, and European governments face massive pressure from far-right factions to halt the financial drain.
Which leads to the cynical analysis that this 40-day drone campaign was essentially a high-stakes PR maneuver by Kiev.
They are desperate to show forward momentum to win back Donald Trump's favor and restore U.S. aid.
But strategically, it hasn't slowed Russia's ground offensive, and it risks massive escalations against Ukrainian infrastructure.
It is the model of a PR victory, masking a deteriorating reality. And regimes everywhere are prioritizing political survival over physical reality.
We see it in Ethiopia, where Abiy Ahmed and the Prosperity Party manufactured a geopolitical crisis demanding sovereign access to the sea.
Right, mobilizing troops near Eritrea as a calculated distraction from massive internal ethnic cleavages and economic collapse.
And in Myanmar, over 100,000 have died since the 2021 coup. The country is burning, yet military chief Min Aung Hlaing is attempting to legitimize his control through sham elections.
So what does this all mean? When you string together Netanyahu, the military in Pakistan and India, Putin, Abiy Ahmed, and the junta in Myanmar.
We are looking at a universal mechanism, leaders manipulating institutions and launching wars to ensure their own survival.
Which brings us perfectly to the global playbook of the strongman. The authors outline a very specific, repeatable methodology.
The mechanics are remarkably consistent. Relentlessly centralize executive power. Foster a personalized cult of personality.
And aggressively attack independent institutions. You can't control the judiciary, the free press, electoral commissions.
But the articles also analyze what happens when the institutional immune system fights back. We have to contrast systems that resist with those that fail.
Look at Brazil. Bolsonaro ran the playbook perfectly, degrading trust in elections and inciting riots when he lost in 2022.
But Brazil's Supreme Electoral Court held firm. They prosecuted the mechanism of the coup, and Bolsonaro is in prison.
In Hungary, Orbán suffered a massive municipal electoral defeat despite a state-captured media landscape.
And in the U.S., independent courts are repeatedly blocking executive overreach during Trump's second term. The institutions can hold.
But then you have systems that completely fail, like Turkey. Erdogan maintains power by systematically dismantling democratic resistance.
When faced with a legitimate threat from Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, Erdogan didn't defeat him at the ballot box.
He used a captured judiciary to imprison him on fabricated charges. The institutions simply weren't robust enough.
And the geopolitical analysis highlights the absolute hypocrisy of Western powers here.
Right. The Trump administration pushed to readmit Turkey into the F-35 program, and Europe is silent on Erdogan's human rights abuses.
Because the unipolar model requires Turkey as a vital NATO buffer state against Russia, it exposes Western lectures on democracy as purely transactional.
And this manipulation isn't always brute force. It's often incredibly bureaucratic. Look at the democratic crisis in India.
The ruling BJP government under Modi executed a massive voter purge called the Special Intensive Revision.
Let's explain how you disenfranchise tens of millions legally. They shifted the burden of proof onto voters to provide legacy documentation of citizenship.
In a country where millions live in informal housing, producing pristine, decades-old paperwork is impossible.
The result? Over 65 million legitimate voters were summarily deleted from the rolls.
Executed with surgical precision. 9 million removed in West Bengal alone, disproportionately targeting women and the Muslim minority.
It's the deliberate engineering of the electorate, and the Supreme Court did absolutely nothing to intervene.
You are using bureaucracy to choose your voters, but that level of engineered reality generates massive friction.
Which sparked the rise of the Cockroach Junta Party, a decentralized, youth-led, anti-establishment movement exploding on social media.
They use satire and digital organizing to bypass captured media and respond to this rigged reality.
And public anger is compounding because of the Brahm Temple heist. This is a perfect case study in institutional mutation.
The movement to build a temple in Ayodhya began in the 80s as a grassroots religious awakening.
But over decades, the VHP and RSS absorbed it, transforming it into a highly centralized, multi-billion rupee corporate treasury run by political loyalists.
They prioritized ideological loyalty over administrative competence. And the inevitable result was a massive theft of gold from the temple complex.
The scandal is the cover-up. Senior politically connected officials are shielded, while junior staff take the fall.
The author notes the profound irony. Ancient Hindu scriptures condemn stealing temple gold as a deadly sin.
They compare this modern heist to medieval invaders who plundered temples. It shatters the foundational narrative of moral purity that BJP relies on.
And combined with severe agrarian distress from erratic monsoons, it presents a massive structural threat ahead of the 2027 Uttar Pradesh elections.
So we've seen systems engineered for control. Let's look at one suffering from absolute structural collapse, the United Kingdom.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer resigned in June 2026, clearing the way for the UK's 7th Prime Minister in just 10 years.
To put that in perspective, between 1979 and 2010, the UK only had 4 leaders in total. The system is eating itself. Why?
3 structural flaws. First, the 24-hour news cycle creates unrelenting pressure for instant solutions to deep, decade-long economic rot.
Long-term governance is politically lethal. Second, no fixed terms for the PM. MPs ruthlessly eject leaders if polling dips.
But the third is the fatal party membership glitch.
Let's break down this glitch. Both major parties outsource leadership elections to grassroots party members.
And the psychological profile of a dues-paying member is completely different from a swing voter. They are highly ideological.
So they elect a leader who appeals to the extreme fringe, but lacks the actual support of the sitting MPs they are supposed to lead.
It guarantees a fractured government from day one. Incoming leader Andy Burnham inherits a broken machine designed to reject his authority.
And this political vacuum collides with massive demographic friction. The UK has a 4 million strong Muslim population.
Economically, that young immigrant population is absolutely essential for an aging workforce to sustain pension systems.
But the rapid cultural shift generated profound social anxiety, masterfully weaponized by the far right.
Nigel Farage's Reform Party moved into the mainstream by exploiting isolated tragedies to stoke Islamophobia.
Echoing the systemic Paki-bashing violence of the 1970s. It's a crisis of national identity masking structural economic decay.
And when political identity masks structural decay, eventually the structure just collapses. Look at Venezuela.
Twin massive earthquakes struck Venezuela, killing at least 1,700 people. But the death toll wasn't just an act of God.
It was the direct result of years of authoritarian governance dismantling public infrastructure and triggering a massive brain drain of healthcare workers.
The state's response was entirely chaotic because there is no state capacity left. Citizens dug through rubble with bare hands.
And the political backdrop is surreal. The U.S. captured Maduro in 2026, and the U.S. effectively controls Venezuela's massive oil revenue.
Putting roughly $8 billion into a strict custodial arrangement just in the first quarter of 2026.
But here, the model completely fails reality. That massive oil wealth is trapped in bureaucratic accounts.
It isn't reaching the Venezuelan people on the ground who desperately need heavy machinery and medical supplies.
The model of external financial control is completely impotent in the face of a physical humanitarian disaster.
Which provides a perfect pivot. Political crises often mask a much deeper failure. The underlying global economic model simply isn't working for the vast majority.
Asim Sajjad Akhtarer methodically dismantles the enduring myth of a booming global middle class in the global south.
Right. The neoliberal promise that developing nations were on a one-way track to prosperity. The India shining narrative, or Pakistan's early 2000s consumer boom.
Akhtar argues that visual prosperity was an illusion. It wasn't built on structural wealth.
It was fueled by cheap consumer credit and a temporary spike in post-9/11 remittances.
Post-colonial capitalism is fundamentally extractive by design. A small elite hoards tangible assets like real estate and financial monopolies,
while selling the myth that hard work guarantees upward mobility.
The reality is massive youth populations in India and Pakistan are drowning in unprecedented consumer and educational debt, forced into the precarious gig economy.
The economic model is working exactly as designed to extract wealth upward. And this has massive national security implications.
Yusuf Nazar argues Pakistan's true existential threat isn't external enemies like India or instability in Afghanistan.
The actual threat is a miserable 2.3% economic growth rate combined with a sovereign public debt at 68.5% of GDP.
Debt servicing now consumes a staggering 43% of Pakistan's entire national budget.
Wow. Just the interest.
Just the interest. When nearly half your revenue goes to creditors, there is literally nothing left for internal development.
Right, so you can't upgrade the power grid.
Exactly. You can't fund education. The state operates as a rent-seeking mechanism to protect elite tax exemptions.
Nazar provides a stark mathematical reality. Unless Pakistan achieves 7 to 8% growth, massively invests in education, and increases female workforce participation, the state will inevitably fail.
All the nuclear weapons in the world cannot save a state that cannot fund itself.
But the sources do present a counter-narrative. We see two divergent paths for Pakistan. The first is building tangible structural progress.
The briefing notes from the second annual Pakistan Banking Summit track highly specific outcomes aimed at bypassing elite monopolies.
SME borrowing grew by 54%. Capital is finally reaching small business owners.
And the Zarqa's digital lending program uses algorithms to approve microloans directly to rural farmers, bypassing corrupt middlemen.
Plus, the Roshan Digital Account 2.0 funneling remittances into economic activity, and the Apni Chat Apnagar program tackling the housing shortfall.
It is the model of patient structural institution building, championed historically by Syed Babar Ali, the founder of LUMS.
He believed national resilience comes from meticulously building merit-based, independent institutions that outlast political patronage.
But you have to contrast that with the deeply destructive alternative path embodied by groups like Fitna al-Khawarij or the TTP.
They claim to fight for a pure Islamic vision, but their methodology relies entirely on extortion and killing civilians,
which violently contradicts core Islamic principles, and they are actively trying to destroy the indigenous social fabric.
Their violence clashes directly with traditional Pashtun values of peaceful dispute resolution, specifically the jirga system.
The TTP fears the jirga because it's an independent authority they cannot control, and they operate from secure sanctuaries in Afghanistan.
Their goal isn't to build a state, it's to violently impose total submission. It's the ultimate battle between creation and destruction.
You see a similar massive economic crossroads looming in Balochistan, depending entirely on if international sanctions on Iran are lifted.
Right now, Balochistan's local economy relies heavily on cheap, smuggled fuel from Iran. It's the lifeblood of those border communities.
If unipolar sanctions lift, Iran will sell that oil legally on the open market.
And the supply of cheap smuggled fuel will dry up overnight, devastating local incomes.
But if managed correctly, a formal economic opening could be a massive boom, establishing trade corridors between Gwadar and Chabahar.
Balochistan produces 70% of Pakistan's dates and huge livestock. Iran could become a massive export market.
But it requires proactively building infrastructure to transition millions from an informal smuggling economy to a formal export economy.
We have spent a lot of time on how political and economic models fail human reality. Now let's shift to the ultimate model makers, big tech and artificial intelligence.
Silicon Valley isn't just building apps anymore. They are trying to dictate physical reality.
Let's look at the SpaceX empire, currently valued at a staggering $2 trillion.
It essentially operates as an independent nation-state. You have the Falcon 9 rocket program holding a monopoly on orbital launches.
You have Starlink controlling 70% of active satellites for global broadband.
And now xAI, attempting to deploy massive AI data centers directly into space to bypass Earth's energy grid bottlenecks.
But Quinn Slobodian calls this financial fabulism. Silicon Valley arrogance pretending the future is already here while ignoring physical reality.
The clearest example is the regulatory wall in space. SpaceX plans to launch up to 1 million satellites for an AI grid.
But the UN's International Telecommunications Union would never approve that because of pure physics. The Kessler effect.
Explain the Kessler effect, because it is the ultimate physical limit.
It's a scenario where the density of objects in low Earth orbit is so high that a single collision creates a cloud of shrapnel,
which hits other satellites, triggering an unstoppable chain reaction that shreds everything in orbit.
making space entirely unusable for generations. You cannot negotiate with the Kessler effect.
Yet Musk wields unprecedented geopolitical power. He unilaterally cut Starlink to Ukrainian naval drones out of personal fear of nuclear escalation.
A private citizen dictating military engagements. And domestically, he uses his position in the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to rewrite federal regulations for corporate profit.
Democratic governments are structurally paralyzed to stop him. The U.S. economy is inextricably tied to big tech.
Politicians are terrified to implement antitrust regulations because damaging SpaceX could wipe out the 401ks of millions of voters.
He has engineered a reality where he is literally too big to regulate. Which brings us to artificial intelligence.
The massive geopolitical question. Can we establish an AI arms control treaty between the U.S. and China?
According to Chris Miller, the definitive answer is no. It is practically and technically impossible.
Because of the mechanism of verification. During the Cold War, you could physically count Soviet concrete nuclear silos with a satellite.
Trust, but verify. But AI is lines of code on a server. You can't verify neural networks from space.
And neither Washington nor Beijing will ever hand over a USB drive with their classified military AI source code just to prove compliance.
Without physical verification, an arms control deal is just paper. The old model fails completely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. AI isn't just a geopolitical weapon. It is fundamentally altering the individual human mind right now.
The materials compare daily AI use to wearing a physical robotic exoskeleton.
Imagine a warehouse worker wearing a powered exoskeleton. They can effortlessly lift a 200-pound engine block.
But if they wear it every single day for every task, their biological muscles atrophy from lack of resistance.
Take the suit off, and they can barely lift a box. Cognitive researchers argue AI does the exact same thing to young plastic minds in education.
A massive study of 27,000 Chinese students proved this. With unrestricted AI access, their homework scores skyrocketed.
But when tested in a secure environment without AI, their scores absolutely plummeted.
Because of transactional delegation, they bypassed the neural friction required to form long-term memories. Their cognitive muscles atrophied.
The solution proposed is the chess engine model. Chess grandmasters use AI to train and analyze moves, but play tournaments completely unassisted.
We need to train students with AI, but formally test them without it. Force them to struggle so they build foundational knowledge.
And that concept of the struggle brings us to Douglas Hofstadter's essay on the nature of language.
Hofstadter speaks over 10 languages, and he completely rejects the push for real-time AI translation tools.
He compares learning a language to climbing Mount Everest. If someone offered a comfortable helicopter ride to the summit, he'd refuse.
Because the joy and profound human connection don't come from instantly transferring data, they come entirely from the struggle of the climb.
The frustration of mastering complex grammar is what literally changes your brain architecture. He refuses to become a human-machine hybrid for corporate efficiency.
Language, and the struggle to acquire it, is central to human identity, which makes the systematic theft of a language devastating.
This connects directly to the Uyghur crisis in Xinjiang. Tahir Eman outlines the terrifying evolution of China's campaign.
They've shifted from visible mass detention camps to a much more insidious model of systematic cultural erasure.
Forcibly separating Uyghur children and placing them in state-run boarding schools where speaking Uyghur is strictly banned.
A multi-generational attempt to sever Uyghur identity and assimilate them into Han Chinese culture.
And the international response has been a cynical failure. When Trump visited Beijing in May 2026, there was no indication he even raised the issue.
The unipolar model dictates that economic access trumps human rights.
So the burden falls on the scattered diaspora, exiles running weekend language schools and building digital archives to save their civilization.
It is a heartbreaking reality. And this tension, the gap between lofty ideals and bloody realities of empire, is baked into the founding of the United States.
Which is preparing to celebrate its 250th anniversary in July 2026. Authors are deeply re-examining the American legacy.
Daniel Falcone argues the U.S. was simultaneously founded as a democratic republic and a white supremacist imperial project.
He argues the Declaration of Independence and Constitution were explicitly designed as legal blueprints for continental expansion and indigenous dispossession.
George Washington called it a nascent empire. They viewed violent removal of native tribes as a divine destiny encoded into the republic.
But Jamel Bowie presents an empowering counter-argument on how to interpret the Declaration today.
When Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," he absolutely didn't mean it as a roadmap for racial or economic equality.
He was a slaveholder making a political argument against the divine right of kings. But the power of the document came from marginalized groups who weaponized the text.
Abolitionists, enslaved Black Americans like Benjamin Banneker and Frederick Douglass forced the country to look at its hypocrisy.
They redefined those 5 words into a radical promise of human rights, eventually forcing the 14th Amendment. The marginalized made the document mean what we assume it means today.
And you see echoes of this complex legacy in Pope Leo XIV's address to the 250th anniversary celebrations in Philadelphia.
He didn't praise American military hegemony or tech superiority. He praised America specifically for its historical legacy of welcoming immigrants.
A very pointed critique of current isolationist trends, but Pope Leo is dealing with his own institutional collapse.
The Catholic Church is facing a massive schism. The Society of St. Pius Aztec, a traditionalist breakaway sect, is consecrating bishops without papal approval,
rejecting Vatican II. And this mirrors global geopolitical shifts. The traditionalist movement is heavily concentrated in the wealthy West.
But the Church's explosive growth to 1.4 billion members is happening almost entirely in the global South.
The old Western model of worship is violently colliding with a diverse, multipolar global reality.
And speaking of how the global South views the West, Mahir Ali quotes MLK calling the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence.
Nick Estes focuses on domestic anti-communist backlashes by the FBI and CIA following local electoral wins by Democratic socialists.
Estes makes a mathematical argument. If you tally the death toll of U.S. capitalism, indigenous genocide, slave trade, structural poverty, the body count would be close to 300 million.
This raises an important question. If the historical record is this structurally violent, how does the West maintain its moral high ground globally?
Patrick Cathora analyzes this through sports journalism, specifically the FIFA World Cup. He identifies moral checkpoints.
When athletes from the global South, like Iran or Senegal, do press conferences, Western journalists aggressively interrogate them about their government's oppressive policies.
But Western athletes are never asked to answer for the invasion of Iraq or civilian drone strikes. They just get to play football.
It subliminally enforces a narrative where the West is the default civilized judge, while the global South must constantly justify their existence.
You see this exact dynamic in the great air conditioning war between Europe and the U.S. online.
Right. Americans mocking Europeans for suffering in heat waves without AC, and Europeans arguing massive U.S. AC usage causes the global warming in the first place.
But an Indian author points out the blinding privilege of this debate. Millions in the global South are dying in extreme heat waves because they can't afford AC or lack electrical grids.
It's a brutal crisis of global economic inequality framed as a quirky cultural difference.
So we have covered massive systemic crises today. Hybrid war, democratic collapse, economic extraction. How does the public cope with this terrifying reality?
According to Alice Bullen, we cope by aggressively distracting ourselves. We cope by looking at a wedding.
Specifically, the heavily rumored Madison Square Garden wedding of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Bullen traces Swift's evolution from a relatable indie underdog to a billionaire corporate entity.
Her recent work is less emotionally vulnerable and focuses on stadium-sized spectacle. A corporate wedding is the ultimate modern iteration of bread and circuses.
An impenetrable spectacle designed specifically to distract an economically exhausted populace from decay.
And it perfectly mirrors the online rise of tradwife culture. When the macroeconomic world feels uncontrollable, there is a psychological retreat into conservative gender roles.
It feels safe when everything else is collapsing.
We are choosing the illusions that comfort us most. We delegate critical thinking to AI because it's easier than learning.
We delegate complex problems to authoritarian strongmen because they promise simple solutions.
And we delegate emotional catharsis to billionaire pop stars to avoid looking at the crumbling infrastructure in our own communities.
That is the perfect synthesis. Every single article reveals a world desperately trying to force messy human reality into neat models.
Whether it's a rigged voter roll in India, a fake peace deal in Lebanon, or a sanitized history of the American empire, our institutions are tirelessly building illusions.
Because they want to avoid dealing with a multipolar world they can no longer control.
Which brings us right back to our opening thought. We want the clean X-ray. But the reality is fundamentally muddy.
The models are broken.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final challenge based on everything we explored today. Look at the most fundamental beliefs you hold about how the world works.
Your country's history, your economic mobility, the technology you rely on.
Ask yourself, are you actively interacting with reality or just the comforting model you've been handed? If someone permanently took off your technological and ideological exoskeleton today, what would you actually know how to do?
That's the real question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, look for the reality beneath the model, and we'll see you next time.
You know, usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision, right?
Yeah, you want it to be exact.
Right. It feels almost like engineering. Like if you fall off your bike and break your arm, you go to the hospital, they put you in a machine, the x-ray pops up on a screen showing this jagged white line right through the bone, and the doctor just points at it.
It's entirely binary.
Yeah.
I mean, the bone is broken or the bone is intact.
Exactly. It's clean. We inherently like things to be visible like that. We want the world to be, you know, neatly categorized into systems we can actually manage.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you step into other realms of medicine, like neurodevelopment or the long-term effects of psychological trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
Right. The picture gets blurry.
Yeah. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is murky, it's subjective, and it's highly unpredictable. You completely lose that illusion of control.
And that loss of control is terrifying, especially for people who are, used to being in charge.
Which brings us to exactly where we find ourselves today, sitting at this table in July of 2026. So let's unpack this massive stack of documents you, the listener, sent in for us to go through. I mean, you really gave us a workout with this one.
We've got quite the reading list today.
Seriously. We're looking at geopolitical think tank briefs, deep dive economic analyses from Money Week and The Economist, dispatches from Time International, and these incredibly detailed reports on everything from like political conventions in Texas to leadership coups in the UK.
And when you first look at this collection, it almost feels chaotic. I mean, it looks like someone just threw a dart at a map of global news and printed out whatever they hit.
Totally.
But when you actually start reading through the source material, a very clear, very intense narrative emerges.
Right, and the overarching theme that connects every single one of your wildly diverse materials today is this massive global struggle. It's the clash between the illusion of top-down control and the undeniable power of human connection and market reality.
It's happening everywhere.
It is. We are living in a moment where governments, financial analysts, military leaders, and politicians are desperately trying to put a leash on these highly complex, unpredictable systems. And they are failing. In some cases, spectacularly.
Yeah, to really understand the headlines right now, we have to look beneath them.
Yeah.
We have to examine the structural forces at play.
So what's the mission today?
Well, what we're going to explore is how that top-down control Whether it's a government trying to regulate a technology they don't fundamentally understand,
Okay.
or a central planner trying to perfectly predict the price of a barrel of oil, is constantly being challenged and outmaneuvered by raw market forces and human behavior.
Okay, yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to see why the most powerful forces left in the world are actually empathy and community.
Before we jump into the first source, I want you, the listener, to think about your own daily life for a second. Think about how often you sit down on a Sunday night and you try to perfectly plan your week.
Oh, do it.
Right. You color code your digital calendar, you block out your meetings down to the minute, you schedule your gym time, your meal prep. You feel like you have total top-down control over your reality.
And then Monday morning happens.
Exactly. Monday morning hits, a random event happens, your car won't start, or your kid gets sick, or a client has a sudden emergency, and that perfect, pristine plan is just thrown into absolute chaos.
The plan never survives contact with reality.
Right, that micro experience of losing control, that friction between the plan and reality, that is exactly what is happening right now to the global economy and the geopolitical order on a massive macro scale.
And honestly, nowhere is that friction burning hotter right now than in the technology sector. If we look at the source material regarding federal AI policy in the United States, we are witnessing the ultimate modern attempt at top-down control meeting absolute operational chaos.
It's the ultimate Sunday night plan meeting a Monday morning disaster.
Precisely.
So let's break down this dramatic shift in AI regulation because the whiplash here is intense. The documents outline a massive pivot from the Trump administration. Initially, the stance was highly libertarian, right?
Yeah, it was very pro-innovation,
Mhm.
specifically designed to avoid mandatory government licensing or any sort of pre-clearance for artificial intelligence models. The idea was just let the market run.
Right. But the source material details that what's happening in practice is the exact opposite of that initial rhetoric. The administration has effectively moved into this strict, highly opaque, de facto licensing system.
The government has basically stepped in and decided they need to be the gatekeepers of the most advanced models.
And they are being incredibly heavy-handed about it, too. I mean, the reports note that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick issued a direct, explicit warning to OpenAI regarding their new model, GPT 5.6 Sol.
Yeah, he essentially told them not to release it without prior government approval.
Which is wild. And this isn't just a polite request. It's a massive flex of federal power that involves intentionally excluding certain foreign firms from accessing this technology. We're also seeing this with Anthropic, right?
We are. The documents highlight that temporary but extremely tight export controls were placed on Anthropic's Mythos 5 model.
So the government is basically saying, we decide who gets to see the code, and we decide when you're allowed to launch your product.
Right, but the operational reality of enforcing that is turning into a complete bureaucratic nightmare.
How so?
Well, the sources explained that Britain's AI Security Institute was actually granted access to OpenAI's Sol model to conduct safety evaluations. But because of these compartmentalized bureaucratic silos, they were initially blocked from getting access to Anthropic's Mythos 5.
Oh, wow. So there's no clear, unified logic that the industry can follow.
Not at all. You have allied nations getting piecemeal access based on completely opaque decision-making. And this leads right into the upcoming black box benchmarks slated for August.
Right. The administration plans to introduce those as a classified process to judge the cyber prowess of these new models before release. But let me stop you there, because the concept of a black box benchmark sounds incredibly flawed from the jump.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Like, how does a tech company pass a test if the test is classified and they aren't even allowed to know the grading rubric?
They essentially can't, which is the critical flaw in this whole top-down plan.
Yeah.
The government lacks the specialized expertise to actually execute and iterate on these tests at the speed the technology is developing.
Right.
And more importantly, very few technical experts working inside these top-tier tech labs actually hold the security clearances required to even look at the classified government red lines.
Okay, so you have a situation where the actual engineers building the AI aren't legally allowed to see the safety benchmarks they are required to pass.
Exactly. It's a catch-22.
And to make matters worse, the government itself is suffering from a massive brain drain. The materials point out severe staff departures from the White House office of the National Cyber Director. Why are they bleeding talent right when they need it most?
It's a culture clash, really, combined with structural limitations.
Mm.
Top-tier tech talent often struggles with the rigid constraints of government work. Plus, the pay disparity compared to the private sector is huge.
Well, I'm sure.
And there are incredibly strict lifestyle requirements for maintaining a top-secret clearance. So you have a government that doesn't fully understand the tech, creating secret tests for developers who aren't legally allowed to see the tests, enforced by a department that is hemorrhaging its smartest people.
It's a mess, and predictably, the industry pushback is totally fractured. According to the reports, the major players agree that some regulation is needed, but they are completely fighting over the mechanism.
Right. OpenAI and Anthropic are pushing for a dedicated, centralized government agency to handle this. Anthropic is actually noted in the sources as the only lab actively supporting a government veto on releases.
But then you have Google taking a completely different stance. They're arguing for an industry-funded, self-regulatory body.
Which basically means they want to grade their own homework.
Exactly. But what I find so fascinating in these think tank briefs is the massive geopolitical risk of this regulatory chaos. By placing these heavy guardrails and tight restrictions on American models, the U.S. government is inadvertently driving developers straight into the arms of China.
We really have to define what is happening with these Chinese models, specifically the rise of open weight models like DeepSeek.
Okay, yeah, let's break down that jargon for a second. When we talk about open weight models, what exactly does that mean for a developer on the ground compared to, say, using something from OpenAI?
So an open weight model means the actual mathematical parameters, the weights that determine how the AI makes decisions, are available to be downloaded directly.
Okay.
A developer can take that model, put it on their own servers, modify it, and run it privately.
Yeah.
Conversely, closed models like OpenAI's GPT series are typically accessed via an API.
Right, so you're just renting access.
Exactly. You send your prompt to their servers, they process it, and send the answer back. You never actually touch the underlying architecture.
So if you're a developer and the U.S. government is constantly threatening to throttle or monitor API access to American models, the appeal of downloading a highly capable Chinese open weight model and running it independently is huge.
It's massive. The briefs note that these Chinese alternatives are vastly cheaper to run. They offer total privacy because they run locally. And the terrifying part for U.S. policymakers, they're currently only about 6 to 10 months behind the absolute bleeding edge of U.S. technology.
Wow, only 6 to 10 months.
Yeah. High-profile tech figures mentioned in the sources, people like David Sachs and former AI advisor Dean Ball, are explicitly warning that deviating from a pro-export strategy is going to cost the U.S. the global AI race.
But here is where we hit the most incredible realization in this whole discussion about the illusion of control. The government thinks it can control the software by holding up the release of these models, but the market has already realized that the actual bottleneck, the true center of power, isn't the software at all. It's the physical hardware. We have to look at the data from Money Week.
The financial reality is completely detaching from the regulatory focus. Let's look at the Magnificent Seven: NVIDIA, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, and Meta.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. They drove the entire AI stock market boom. Between early 2023 and early 2026, they added roughly $15 trillion in market value.
But the source material details an absolute bloodbath over just the past month. I mean, they collectively lost around $2.2 trillion in market value.
It's a staggering drop.
Microsoft and Meta dropped more than 20% from their peaks, officially entering a bear market. The rest of them dropped at least 10%. Why did the market suddenly panic on the companies building the software?
It comes down to a terrifying realization regarding capital expenditure, or CapEx. The source notes that these AI hyperscalers, the massive cloud computing providers, are planning to spend roughly $1 trillion on AI data centers.
That's with a T, 1 trillion.
Yes, we are talking about physical infrastructure, land, cooling systems, power grids, and thousands upon thousands of highly specialized computer chips.
And the market is suddenly waking up and asking a very uncomfortable question, right? Like, is this massive, unprecedented spend actually going to generate profitable, long-term earnings?
Exactly. Because right now, the companies building the AI software are burning cash at a historic rate. The data points out that U.S. technology-related CapEx has actually risen above 5% of the gross domestic product.
Wait, 5% of the entire GDP?
Yes. And the last time we saw that specific metric hit that level was during the dot-com bubble in the year 2000.
Oh, wow. That's a scary parallel.
It's a massive red flag for a structural market correction. The fear is that they are overbuilding infrastructure for software products that haven't proven they can generate enough revenue to justify the cost.
But here's the twist. While the AI software giants are bleeding trillions in market value, another sector is absolutely exploding. The semiconductor manufacturers, the physical hardware builders.
The folks making the chips?
Right. According to MoneyWeek, Micron is up 265% this year. Intel is up 254%. Samsung is up 144%. Memory chip prices have literally quadrupled over the past year.
The contrast is just stark. The companies writing the code are losing value, while the companies manufacturing the silicon are seeing historic exponential gains.
I was reading through this section and it hit me. It feels exactly like the 1849 gold rush. Think about it. The people digging for the gold, the AI software labs operating at massive losses, desperately trying to build the ultimate godlike model, are being regulated to death by the government?
Yeah, they're facing all the red tape.
Exactly. Red tape, secret benchmarks, and skyrocketing operational costs. Meanwhile, the guys selling the pickaxes and the shovels, the semiconductor companies making the specialized microchips, are making all the guaranteed money. If you have to ask the government for permission to swing your pickaxe, you are going to go broke buying shovels.
That analogy perfectly captures the structural reality. The AI firms were already operating at a loss, largely reliant on venture capital funding to subsidize their research. Now, because global chip production is incredibly constrained, I mean, building a new semiconductor fabrication facility takes years and billions of dollars, the demand has wildly outstripped supply.
So the prices just skyrocket.
Exactly, the price of the chips has skyrocketed. This dynamic is transferring enormous amounts of wealth directly from the AI platform companies to the hardware manufacturers.
So if we step back, what does this actually mean for the White House's attempt at controlling artificial intelligence?
It means their regulatory framework is entirely misaligned with the economic reality. Governments are spending all their political capital trying to regulate the software, the algorithms, the chat models, the user interfaces, but the actual economic reality is outpacing them.
The hardware is the real bottleneck.
The true bottleneck is the physical hardware. You can mandate all the software restrictions, export controls, and secret benchmarks you want, but if you do not control the flow and cost of the physical microchips and the energy grids required to run them, you aren't really controlling the industry.
Right.
The market forces driving the hardware boom are completely immune to the White House's software benchmarks.
It's the Monday morning chaos completely overriding the Sunday night plan. The market just routes around the obstacle. The government tries to build a dam to stop the river, and the water just finds a new path.
That's exactly it.
And that exact dynamic market's completely humiliating people who think they can perfectly predict and control the future is a perfect lens to look at our next set of sources. Because it isn't just government bureaucrats struggling with the illusion of control.
No, it is not. The world's top financial analysts, the people who are paid exorbitant sums to understand traditional commodity markets, are proving to be equally bad at predicting human behavior and geopolitical reality.
Oh man, we have to talk about The Economist and their massive public myths on global oil prices. The source material lays this out so clearly, and it is a fascinating case study in the folly of forecasting.
It really is.
So back in late April 2026, oil traders in the market were predicting that prices would drop to around $88 a barrel by the end of the year. The Economist published a piece essentially laughing at those traders. They called the market's expectation la land, heavily implying that prices were going to spike much higher due to global instability.
And the reality was a spectacular miscalculation on their part. Brent crude didn't just drop to $88, it crashed to just over $70 a barrel.
They weren't just wrong, they were aggressively wrong in the opposite direction. Let's break down the mechanics of why they missed this so badly, because the sources point out two distinct massive blind spots. First, they completely misread the geopolitical chessboard regarding the United States and Iran.
They did. The Economist operated on a purely theoretical, ideological assumption. They assumed that the United States and Iran would absolutely refuse to negotiate over the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz.
And just to clarify for the listener, the Strait of Hormuz is the massive choke point for global oil shipping. If that gets shut down, supply plummets and prices skyrocket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Economist predicted a prolonged, stubborn standoff that would choke global supply. But they failed to account for the messy, practical reality of domestic political pressure.
Right. The politicians have to face voters.
Exactly. The Trump administration was facing immense heat from American voters over high gas prices. In June, prioritizing domestic political survival over international posturing, they actually struck a provisional deal.
And that flooded the market.
That immediately brought a massive amount of oil supply back online, crushing the anticipated price spike.
They assumed ideological stubbornness would win out over practical domestic political survival. And they were wrong. Politicians will always pivot if it means saving their poll numbers. But the second mistake was even bigger. Because it had to do with China's demand. And this is where it gets into almost like Bond villain territory.
Yes, the analyst failed to anticipate a drastic, sudden drop in Chinese oil demand. China slashed its crude imports by an astonishing 5 million barrels a day compared to the previous year.
But wait, if an economy the size of China suddenly drops its oil consumption by 5 million barrels a day, that should signal a massive catastrophic economic recession. Factories shutting down, logistics halting. But that didn't happen. How did China slash their imports so drastically without crashing their own economy?
Through the use of massive, highly opaque underground oil reserves.
Explain the mechanics of this, because the source material mentions this and it is just fascinating. How do you hide millions of barrels of oil?
It involves physical underground salt caverns and massive storage tanks that are intentionally kept off the official ledgers. These reserves are a complex, blended network of official state government stockpiles and private corporate inventories. The data is kept entirely out of the public eye.
So it essentially acts as a massive, invisible shock absorber for the Chinese economy.
Exactly. When global prices spike, instead of buying expensive oil on the open market, China just quietly taps into these hidden domestic reserves. They drastically reduce their need to import, which sent a massive demand shock through the global market, drive the price down to $70.
Because suddenly nobody's buying.
Right. The economists couldn't predict it because they literally couldn't see it. The data was hidden.
And what I absolutely love about the sources you provided is that the economists didn't just bury this failure. They actually did a postmortem on their own terrible predictions. They used an AI model, GPT 5.5, to analyze roughly 7,000 of their own editorial leaders published since the year 2000.
It is a rare and brilliant piece of institutional self-reflection. The AI combed through decades of articles and identified 1,400 pieces that made clear, falsifiable predictions about the future. It then rated each prediction on a 1 to 10 scale based on how contrarian or outside the consensus it was at the time, and then cross-referenced that score with how accurate it actually turned out to be.
And the results are hilarious and incredibly telling. The AI found that when The Economist makes moderate, safe, status quo predictions, scoring up to a 7 out of 10 on the contrarian scale, they're actually pretty good. They have better than even odds of being right.
Right.
But when they try to be wildly contrarian, scoring an 8, 9, or 10, they almost always fail spectacularly.
The data bears that out clearly. When they stayed moderate, they correctly predicted the rise of smartphones in 2002. They saw streaming replacing physical DVDs in 2008, and they accurately predicted the rapid global spread of COVID-19 in early 2020.
But when they swung for the fences,
they completely bought into the weapons of mass destruction narrative in Iraq. They entirely missed Donald Trump's 2016 victory, and they openly admit in the source material that the global oil market is their biggest, most consistent blind spot. They missed massive market shifts in 1999, again in 2013, and as we just discussed, they missed huge in April 2026.
But here is the twist. The Economist actually defends their wrong predictions. The editors argue that taking definitive, bold stances, even when they turn out to be completely wrong, is vital to their mission.
Yeah, they do.
They argue that it sharpens public discourse, it keeps their reporting from being what they call joy-slayingly dull, and it actively fuels market dynamics by forcing investors to argue against them.
It's a fascinating intellectual defense. They are essentially saying that their ultimate value as a publication isn't in being perfectly accurate. It's in being provocative enough to force the global market to evaluate its own underlying assumptions.
That's a clever spin.
As staunch free market advocates, they actually take a certain philosophical satisfaction in being proven wrong by the raw mechanics of the market. They acknowledge that the liquid market price of an asset is the distilled judgment of humanity, which no single centralized planner or elite commentator can reliably outperform.
Let's pause on that phrase because the implications are huge. The distilled judgment of humanity. I have to push back on the institutions here because if we connect this distilled judgment to our next topic, the rise of stablecoins and the evolution of money, the hypocrisy of central planners becomes glaring.
It really does.
Think about this logic. The Economist openly admits that their most extreme, confident predictions are usually wrong, but they defend them because they spark public discourse and they ultimately just defer to the wisdom of the market. If the smartest, most well-resourced financial analysts in the room openly admit their boldest forecasts are just well-argued guesses, why should we trust central bankers to perfectly regulate a $300 billion stablecoin market that they barely seem to understand?
That is the exact tension driving the current panic in global finance right now. The source material dives deep into the regulatory panic surrounding stablecoins, and it fundamentally challenges the very definition of what money is.
Right, because if you look at a traditional economics textbook, it defines money by its functions. It's a means of exchange, a reliable store of value, and a standard unit of account.
But the sources argue that modern fiat money, currency backed by government decree rather than a physical commodity like gold, is actually just a highly sophisticated confidence trick.
A confidence trick. I love that phrasing.
It relies entirely on public trust and a very specific institutional framework to function.
The sources outline 3 core characteristics that make modern money work: singleness, transferability, and elasticity.
Okay.
Let's break those down so we understand exactly what the central banks were terrified of losing.
Sure. So singleness means that all dollars are valued equally across all institutions. A dollar deposited in a Chase bank account has the exact same purchasing power as a dollar deposited in Wells Fargo.
Makes sense.
Transferability simply means it moves frictionlessly through the economy.
But the third one, elasticity, is the crucial mechanism.
Elasticity means the supply of money can rapidly adapt to sudden spikes in demand, usually through central bank emergency interventions.
Like a bailout.
Exactly. If there is a massive financial crisis and everyone rushes to the bank to withdraw their funds at the exact same time a bank run the Federal Reserve acts as the lender of last resort,
Yeah.
they can literally inject new liquidity into the system to ensure the banks don't collapse.
Which stops the panic.
Right. That emergency elasticity is what gives the public the confidence to leave their money in the bank.
So enter stablecoins. For the listener, these are privately issued digital currencies built on blockchain technology. They are specifically designed to maintain a fixed value against a fiat currency, usually pegged exactly to the US dollar. And this market is not a fringe experiment anymore. It is massive.
Huge.
The sources note that dollar-pegged stablecoins make up 99.4% of the market, which is completely dominated by 2 private players, Tether and Circle.
They are moving hundreds of billions of dollars globally. But the fundamental question the regulators are asking is, are stablecoins actually true money?
And based on those 3 pillars we just discussed, the answer is not quite. The sources explain they lack true singleness because during moments of extreme market panic, the value of a stablecoin has occasionally slipped below that rigid $1 peg.
But far more importantly, they completely lack elasticity. They are private entities. They do not have access to central bank emergency support to withstand sudden, massive redemptions.
So there's no safety net.
Exactly. If everyone holding Tether suddenly tries to cash out their digital tokens for real US dollars at the exact same time, there's no Federal Reserve waiting in the wings to print more money and save them. From a structural standpoint, they currently function much more like digital money market funds than traditional insured bank deposits.
But wait, if they lack the safety net of elasticity, why is the market for them exploding? Because the benefits they offer are huge. The reports outline that stablecoins offer vastly slicker payments, completely bypassing layers of legacy banks, clearinghouses, and lawyers by using smart contracts.
Let's define smart contracts, because that is the engine driving this efficiency. A smart contract is simply self-executing code on a blockchain. It acts as an automated escrow.
Okay.
If 2 parties agree to a transaction, the smart contract holds the funds and automatically releases them only when the specific conditions are met. There's no need for a human lawyer or a central bank to verify or clear the transaction. It is instantaneous and operates 24/7.
Which means they provide vastly cheaper, faster cross-border remittances.
Yeah.
If you want to send money to family in another country, you don't have to pay massive wire fees or wait 3 business days. And the most vital use case mentioned in the sources is happening in emerging economies. In countries where the local government currency is experiencing hyperinflation and losing its value daily, citizens are buying stablecoins simply as an inflation hedge. They just want reliable exposure to the stable US dollar, and stablecoins give them that access without needing a traditional US bank account.
But that exact mechanism is what terrifies global regulators. The Bank for International Settlements explicitly notes in the briefs that these digital tokens facilitate illicit activity and money laundering.
Sure, that's the classic argument.
But beyond crime, they pose a systemic threat to emerging economies by stripping local central banks of their revenue from printing money, a concept known as seigniorage.
Wait, they lose the revenue from printing money?
Yes. If the citizens of a country abandon the local currency and only transact in private digital dollars, the local central bank completely loses its ability to control its own monetary policy. They lose the illusion of control.
Exactly, so the central planners are desperately trying to regain control. But just like we saw with the US government trying to regulate AI hardware, the global regulatory response to stablecoins is a complete fragmented mess.
The divergent approaches, detail in the sources are baffling. Look at the UK. The Bank of England is actually considering giving major stablecoin issuers access to their lender of last resort facilities.
Really?
Yeah, they're essentially saying, if we can't beat them, let's bring them into the traditional banking safety net. But they are proposing a strict mandate where stablecoins must be backed by a highly conservative mix of a 30% central bank deposit and 70% short-term government debt.
But then you cross the Atlantic, and the United States is going in the exact opposite direction. The U.S. regulatory framework is explicitly restricting those vital lender of last resort privileges exclusively to traditional chartered banks.
Right.
They are keeping stablecoins out in the cold, forcing them to remain private risks, although the Federal Reserve might eventually grant them basic payment accounts just to monitor the flow.
And then you have the European Union, which is offering zero central bank backstops whatsoever, and instead demanding that stablecoin issuers keep a minimum portion of their reserves locked inside traditional commercial bank deposits. It is a completely fractured regulatory landscape where nobody agrees on how to manage the risk.
It's the illusion of control playing out in real time.
It really is.
Exactly. Whether it's the Chinese government physically hiding millions of barrels of oil in underground caverns to manipulate the global commodities market, or tech developers creating self-executing digital tokens on a blockchain that move billions of dollars across borders instantly without permission. Human behavior and raw market dynamics are consistently outmaneuvering the central planners. The market price really is the distilled judgment of humanity.
It is. But we have to recognize that this distilled judgment gets incredibly messy and often very dangerous when we take this dynamic and apply it to physical national borders.
Oh, absolutely.
When political leaders face this loss of control economically, when the market stops listening to them, they almost always turn to international conflict to control their domestic narratives.
Which perfectly explains the geopolitical theater outlined in our next set of sources. We have to look at the absolute friction happening right now between Turkey and Israel. I was reading through this intelligence brief, and the escalating rhetoric is just intense. It feels like they're on the brink of absolute disaster.
The war of words has reached an unprecedented fever pitch. The documents detail that Israeli politicians are now publicly comparing Turkey to the existential structural threat posed by Iran.
Wow.
And in a massive diplomatic escalation, Israel officially recognized the 1915 Armenian genocide.
And to provide context for the listener, recognizing the Armenian genocide is the ultimate red line for Turkey. It is the diplomatic nuclear option.
And Turkish President Erdogan is firing right back with equally explosive rhetoric. He has explicitly accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza, and he is framing Israel's military actions in Syria and Lebanon as a direct, imminent threat to Turkey's own national security.
But the sources make a crucial distinction here. To understand why this escalation is happening right now, we have to look past the megaphones and look at their domestic realities. This intense international friction is serving very specific, desperate political agendas at home.
It is the ultimate domestic distraction strategy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heavily utilizing this besieged nation narrative ahead of his elections. It rallies his conservative base by painting a picture of threats on all sides.
But the situation for Erdogan is even more fundamentally tied to basic economics. He is using Israel as a massive, loud foreign distraction from Turkey's crippling domestic issues. The reports note that Turkey is currently facing 30% inflation.
Let's pause and consider what 30% inflation actually means for society. It means the price of basic staples, bread, fuel, medicine, is rising so fast that wages cannot possibly keep up.
Right.
It means the life savings of the middle class are being rapidly evaporated. When a population cannot afford basic groceries, the potential for civil unrest is massive.
Exactly. Can you imagine going to the grocery store and everything is just astronomically higher every month? If you are a political leader and your economy is failing that badly, you desperately need a very loud foreign enemy to point at. You need a villain to unite the public against so they stop looking at their own empty bank accounts.
It's a classic playbook.
But the briefs point out that it's not all just political theater. There are actual physical, tactical friction points, making this highly combustible.
Yes, the primary physical battleground for this tension is Syria. Following the collapse of the previous regime, Turkey and Israel are desperately trying to maintain rival spheres of influence in the region. Turkey wants a strong, stable Syrian state on its border to prevent Kurdish insurgencies from gaining a foothold.
But Israel, conversely, prefers a weak, highly fragmented Syria that is too disorganized to ever pose a unified military threat to their northern border.
Right.
And the tensions are mounting over Turkey's heavy direct influence on Syria's new transitional government under a leader named Ahmed al-Sharaa. Furthermore, the reports note that Israeli airstrikes have been actively hitting Syrian air bases that were slated to be transferred to Turkish control.
And the regional alliances are shifting rapidly in response to this friction. Turkey is actively building military and economic ties with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan to create a unified bloc to counter Israel. In response, Israel is strengthening military and intelligence cooperation with Greece and Cyprus.
Which is entirely about controlling the lucrative natural gas fields in the eastern Mediterranean and boxing Turkey out of that economic zone. It is literally like a massive, high-stakes game of risk.
And then you introduce the ultimate geopolitical wildcard,
Yeah.
the Trump administration.
The sources outline that Trump's personal rapport with Erdogan has deeply frustrated Netanyahu. Trump has shown a willingness to let Turkey take the lead in stabilizing Syria. But the absolute peak of the tension right now revolves around hardware, specifically the F-35 stealth fighter program.
Trump announced that the U.S. is formally reviewing the decision to allow Turkey back into the F-35 program after they were banned back in 2019 for purchasing Russian defense systems.
And the intelligence analysts explicitly suggest that Israel's sudden, heavy public criticism of Turkey, the genocide accusations, the Iran comparisons, is actually a preemptive political strike. They are trying to generate enough outrage to pressure the U.S. Congress into blocking that F-35 sale.
It is a masterclass in using loud public rhetoric for a specific tactical gain. But here is the most fascinating detail in the entire brief, and it ties right back to our theme of the limits of ideology versus economic reality. Despite the fierce public rivalry, despite the explicit accusations of genocide, despite the formal trade embargoes declared by both sides,
The oil is still flowing. This detail blew my mind. The quiet pragmatism beneath the screaming headlines. The diplomatic footprints are still firmly in place. The sources note that Turkish goods are still steadily reaching Israel via third-party shipping routes. And crucially, Azerbaijani and Iraqi oil continues to flow through the BTC pipeline directly to the Turkish port of Ceyhan, where it is loaded onto tankers and shipped straight to Israel.
publicly they act like bitter existential enemies locked in a holy war. Privately, they ensure the economic lifeblood keeps pumping.
It's wild. We see a very similar dynamic of using intense conflict to mask domestic failure when we look at the crisis in Pakistan. The source material outlines this brutal, ongoing power struggle between the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and the current Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir.
It's a conflict that is entirely consuming Pakistan's power dynamics. Imran Khan, who initially rose to power in 2018 with heavy military backing after his famous cricket star, eventually fell out with the military establishment. He was removed in 2022 and is now serving a 14-year prison sentence on corruption charges that his supporters and many international observers view as entirely politically motivated.
And the reports note he's been in prison for over 1,000 days now. The details of his confinement are grim. He has very limited contact with his family. His eyesight is worsening. He's suffering from a blood clotting condition, and his family alleges he is being denied access to his personal physician.
They're trying to break him.
Yeah, they claim the authorities are trying to systematically break his morale through psychological warfare and physical isolation.
But the strategy is completely backfiring. The attempt to control him is having the exact opposite effect. His popularity among the public has surged. He's maintaining a rigorous exercise routine, claiming he is physically stronger, and operating with what his family describes as a total liberty or death mindset.
Wow.
He's releasing statements calling Munir mentally unstable from behind bars and actively urging the public to resist the military's authority.
And meanwhile, Asim Munir has promoted himself to field marshal, heavily expanded the military's grip on civilian governance, and severely restricted Khan's political party, the PTI. But just like Erdogan in Turkey, Munir is using this massive political conflict to mask a failing economy. Pakistan's inflation has reached 11.7%. Fuel and energy prices have skyrocketed following the regional instability from the Iran war. The ruling government is suffering massive electoral setbacks and is widely viewed by the public as lacking any democratic legitimacy.
If we synthesize these two geopolitical situations,
Right, let me stop you because I have a question about how we interpret this. Let's unpack this dynamic. In both the Turkey-Israel conflict and the domestic crisis in Pakistan, we see these leaders, Erdogan, Netanyahu, Munir, using intense external or internal threats to completely mask their failing economies. Is modern geopolitics basically just local politics wearing a bigger, scarier suit?
I think that is a highly accurate assessment, and it reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of power. Leaders try to project total, unquestionable control over their nations, but they are entirely at the mercy of their domestic economies.
Because people need to eat.
Exactly. If inflation hits 30% in Turkey or nearly 12% in Pakistan, the population gets restless. The only tool these leaders have left to maintain the illusion of control is the narrative of conflict. But the underlying reality, the fact that Azerbaijani oil still flows to Israel while Erdogan loudly condemns them, shows that economic survival ultimately trumps ideological warfare every single time. They can pretend to be ideological zealots for the cameras, but they govern as desperate economic pragmatists.
It is just incredible to see the curtain pulled back like that. But this tension, this desperate struggle between rigid ideology and the messy practical reality of building coalitions isn't just happening in the Middle East and Asia.
No, it is not. The exact same forces are tearing apart domestic political parties right here in the West. The illusion of top-down control, failing in the face of grassroots reality, is a universal theme. Let's look at the source material regarding the recent massive shifts in the UK Labour Party.
This was a seismic shift in British politics. The UK Labour Party just ousted their sitting Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and replaced him with Andy Burnham.
And the specific reasons detailed in the report for Starmer's downfall are very telling. Starmer became deeply unpopular following severe local election losses to the far-right Reform UK Party, led by Nigel Farage. But the root of his ouster wasn't just losing votes, it was a perceived lack of foundational principle.
He broke major campaign promises. The sources list them out. He backtracked on taxing the wealthy, he abandoned promises to provide free university tuition, and he failed to show compassion to migrants.
Right.
Compounding this policy failure, he got caught up in a scandal accepting lavish freebies, expensive concert tickets, designer clothing, while simultaneously blaming the country's economic failures on the previous administration.
He fundamentally lost the trust of the working-class base. The party realized that holding on to him was a path to electoral destruction. So they adapt. They bring in Andy Burnham.
Burnham is described in the briefs as a charismatic and highly combative centrist. He previously served as the mayor of Manchester and successfully revitalized their local economy. He recently won a key by-election straight in the heartland of the Reform Party, which set the stage for his leadership challenge.
But to gain that power and to maintain the coalition, Burnham is having to drastically adapt his platform. The sources note that he is actively walking back his previous support on liberal touchstone issues like immigration and trans rights. He is pivoting hard to the center to appeal directly to the disillusioned working-class voters.
His entire mandate, the main hope of the Labour Party establishment, is that Burnham has the raw political talent to defeat Nigel Farage and the Reform UK Party by the 2029 election, preventing what they view as a Trump-style authoritarian agenda from taking over Britain.
It is a pure survival mechanism. The Labour Party realized that holding on to a rigid, unpopular leader or a rigid set of progressive policies that were actively alienating the working class would lead to their political extinction. So they adapted. They expanded their tent toward the center to survive a populist threat.
Now, contrast that pragmatic adaptation with what the source material reports happened at the 2026 Houston Republican Convention with the Texas GOP. This is a purely factual report from the sources, but the strategic contrast to the UK is jarring.
It is a completely divergent strategy.
Yeah.
The documents detail a pervasive, overt hostility toward Muslim delegates at the convention. Specifically, a 65-year-old Egyptian-born physical therapist named Tariq Hussein and his son Mohammed. They were routinely subjected to open bigotry, insults, and explicit demands from fellow delegates to leave the country.
And it wasn't just fringe attendees causing trouble in the hallways. It involved formal actions by party leadership. State Board of Education member Julie Pickering made multiple procedural attempts to formally expel Tariq Hussein from the convention floor. She falsely branded him a terrorist simply because of his loose affiliation with the Council on American Islamic Relations, or AER.
The rhetoric from the leadership was explicit. The outgoing party chair, Abraham George, warned the crowd of a socialist Islamic alliance and directly told the Hussein family to leave the Republican caucus and joined the Democrats.
Wow.
State lawmakers literally established a new anti-Sharia caucus during the convention. State Representative Brent Money explicitly told Muslim attendees their faith was a lie. State Senator Bob Hall openly stated that Muslims should not be allowed to serve in any level of government.
The rhetoric escalated all the way to rejecting the very concept of American assimilation. The report notes that activist Pastor Rick Scarborough directly told Mohammed Hussein that if he embraces Islam, there's no place in America for you, framing their mere presence at a Republican convention not as an attempt to assimilate into conservative politics, but as a subversive attempt to take over.
The context provided in the source material is that this hostility was heavily influenced by a wave of latent Islamophobia following the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, which was exacerbated locally when Governor Greg Abbott declared Sanayir a terrorist organization over remarks made by its national leader.
Right.
But the ideological outcome of the convention is what is most significant for our analysis. The 2026 convention served as a clear demonstration of a hardline faction intending to actively exclude non-Christians from their political coalition.
This is where I want to offer a pushback based purely on political strategy. If we look at this strictly through the lens of building a winning coalition, the exact way the UK Labour Party just did by pivoting to Burnham, the Texas GOP situation seems strategically baffling. Think about the Hussein family. They represent the traditional conservative American dream.
They really do.
They raised 4 children in healthcare. They gravitated to the GOP because they share the exact same core beliefs in individual liberty, traditional family values, and small government. They are entirely aligned on the policy. But the GOP is actively pushing away voters who already agree with them. It is like a business aggressively turning away paying customers just because the manager doesn't like their background.
It is a profound strategic contradiction. And if we connect the UK and US situations, we see 2 completely divergent strategies for political survival in the modern era. Labor is adapting, shifting to the center, trying to broaden its appeal and expand its coalition to survive a populist threat. But elements of the Texas GOP are doing the exact opposite. They are rigidifying their boundaries and enforcing strict ideological and religious purity tests.
It raises a massive existential question about the future of political movements. Does a movement survive by expanding its tent, finding common ground, and building a massive coalition? Or does it survive by aggressively purifying its base until only the absolute true believers are left?
Historically speaking, aggressive purification almost always leads to isolation and eventual loss of power, because the fundamental math of democratic elections requires addition, not subtraction. You have to bring people in.
Yeah.
Which perfectly transitions us into our next section. The actual mathematical power of empathy and human connection.
Yes. Because if alienating people and trying to mandate top-down control constantly fails, whether you are a government regulating AI or a political party enforcing purity tests, what actually works when you want to build something massive and resilient, it turns out whether you were trying to become a Silicon Valley billionaire or you were just trying to find happiness on a Saturday afternoon, it all comes down to genuine, organic human connection.
Let's start with the math of billionaires. The source material includes a fascinating essay by Paul Graham that actively debunks the popular political myth that massive wealth is only achieved through exploitation and cheating the system.
I love this piece because it ignores the politics entirely and just breaks the concept of wealth down to pure, undeniable compound math.
It does. Graham is a highly respected figure who has trained entrepreneurs for over 2 decades and helped create around 30 billionaires. He argues that extraordinary wealth is built cleanly through the magic of exponential growth. It ultimately comes down to 2 simple numbers: the growth rate and how long that growth is sustained.
He gives these wild hypothetical examples to prove the point. If a startup grows at an extreme rate of 93% a month, the founders become billionaires in less than 10 months.
Which is almost impossible to maintain, but yes.
Right. But even at a much more typical sustainable rate, say 15% monthly growth, an entrepreneur who starts a business generating just $10,000 a month in revenue can achieve a billion-dollar valuation in exactly 5 years.
The math of compound interest is relentless. But the core thesis of Graham's essay isn't the math itself. It is how you actually achieve and sustain that 15% monthly growth for 5 straight years.
Because it's not easy.
You cannot do it through exploitation. You cannot trick people into buying a bad product month after month for half a decade. The foundational key, the absolute structural requirement to sustain that kind of exponential growth, is deep, genuine empathy.
Walk us through how empathy actually drives product design, because it sounds like a buzzword, but he frames it as a hard metric.
Empathy in this context means you have to understand a specific group of people so perfectly that you can identify their friction points and genuinely improve their lives.
Okay.
Let's say you are building software for accountants. You have to deeply understand what makes their daily work miserable. You have to care about solving that specific misery. If you build a tool that perfectly alleviates their pain, they buy it. And if you consistently make your customers happy, the exponential growth happens organically through word of mouth. They tell other accountants. Empathy is the engine of the wealth creation.
So empathy is not a soft HR skill in this context. It is a hard structural requirement for achieving exponential scale. You literally cannot build a billion-dollar company unless you deeply care about solving a problem for a massive group of people.
Exactly.
Now, shift that understanding of empathy and community from the corporate boardroom to the stadium bleachers. Let's look at the Time International piece on the psychology of sports fandom.
This study provides the psychological backing for the math we just discussed. Cognitive psychologist Helen Keyes published a study in 2023 showing that attending live sporting events, whether it is a massive professional football stadium or just a local amateur rugby match, significantly improves a person's overall life satisfaction. It creates a stronger, measurable sense that life is worthwhile.
But the key distinction the study makes is live attendance. The sources point out that while watching sports on TV at home is fun and temporarily improves your mood, it does not reduce underlying feelings of loneliness. Being at a live match, in person, physically surrounded by other people who share your passion, directly kills loneliness.
Because it fulfills core psychological needs that modern society often neglects. Social psychologist Daniel Wan highlights that sports fandom fosters personal resilience, boosts self-esteem, and, most importantly, it fulfills the basic human need to belong through deep social connectivity.
Yeah.
It provides structure. The rituals of the season, the tailgates, the weekly schedules provide comforting milestones in our lives. It offers a healthy balance between being part of a massive unified community and still having an individual identity based on your specific team allegiance.
And the math here is just as fascinating as Paul Graham's billionaire math. The study notes that fans get a net benefit to their mental well-being and life satisfaction, even though they walk into the stadium knowing there is a 50% chance their team is going to lose and absolutely ruin their mood for the rest of the day.
They accept the acute pain of the loss because the long-term psychological value of the belonging is so much higher. The community is the reward, not just the victory.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting for me, and I want to see if you agree. If we look at these two sources side by side, the math of becoming a billionaire and the psychology of being a sports fan are essentially relying on the exact same human mechanism.
Let's follow that thread. How do you connect the two?
Both of them require a deep, almost irrational commitment to understanding and serving a specific community. The sports fan gives their unconditional loyalty and empathy to a team and to their fellow fans in the stands. The billionaire founder gives their deep empathy and relentless problem-solving to a customer base. In both scenarios, the ultimate currency isn't actually the money, and it isn't the final score on the board. The ultimate currency is belonging. It's the connection to something outside yourself.
That is a profound connection to make. In a world where governments are desperately trying to mandate top-down control, like we saw with the classified AI benchmarks, or central bankers trying to strangle the stablecoin economy, or political leaders enforcing strict ideological purity, we are seeing that organic bottom-up empathy is vastly more powerful.
Yeah, it really is.
It is infinitely more resilient. You cannot mandate a billion-dollar valuation by government decree, and you cannot mandate a stadium full of cheering fans. Those things have to be earned through genuine, reciprocal human connection.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final piece of source material in our stack today. If empathy and belonging are truly the most powerful, resilient forces we have, what does it look like when those forces are taken to their absolute ultimate extreme?
It culminates in an article titled The Best of Us, which reflects on America's 250th anniversary by examining the ultimate expression of collective empathy, the Medal of Honor.
This piece is incredibly moving, especially in the context of everything else we have discussed today about toxic political division, geopolitical theater, and the obsession with individual wealth.
The article argues that despite the deep, seemingly insurmountable political polarization in the United States today, where citizens can barely agree on the definition of patriotism, national identity, or even who deserves to be called a hero, the Medal of Honor remains one of the very few universally respected symbols across all political lines.
And the exclusivity of the award is just staggering when you look at the raw numbers provided in the source. Out of more than 40 million Americans who have served in the military throughout the nation's history, only 3,536 have ever received the Medal of Honor.
It's an incredibly small fraction.
It is, and it's important to note the source mentions only one woman has ever received it, primarily because the award has historically been strictly restricted to actions taken in direct physical combat.
The rigor of the award process is intensely demanding. It requires sworn eyewitness testimony, incontrovertible documentary evidence, extensive military review through multiple branches, and final, personal presidential approval. It is intentionally designed to recognize only a very narrow, specific category of heroism.
Right.
As the author notes, it is not about diminishing the heroism of teachers or healthcare workers. It is about recognizing a singular, terrifying type of action.
And the article defines that action so beautifully. It explicitly states that the medal is not about fearlessness. It is not about being a comic book superhero who just isn't afraid to die. It represents the specific agonizing moment when someone actively chooses another person's life over their own, under the most dangerous, terrifying circumstances imaginable.
The source highlights the visceral story of Vietnam War veteran Sammy Davis to illustrate this. He was severely wounded, his unit was under devastating enemy fire, but he voluntarily crossed a river under that heavy fire to rescue 3 of his comrades who were trapped.
Just incredible.
And when he spoke about the incident later, he explicitly said his actions were not driven by duty, and they were certainly not driven by courage. They were driven purely by love for his fellow soldiers.
Love, not military orders, not a top-down mandate from a general trying to perfectly execute a battle plan. Love, the ultimate, most irrational form of empathy. And the article connects this act of individual sacrifice all the way back to the ideological founding of the American Republic.
Yes, it reflects on the 250th anniversary by arguing that the Medal of Honor perfectly embodies 2 central, often competing principles of the American experiment: radical individual liberty and profound collective responsibility.
They bring up that famous Benjamin Franklin quote from the signing of the Declaration of Independence. "We must all hang together, or, most assuredly, we shall all hang separately."
It perfectly illustrates that unity, that collective empathy, was the absolute prerequisite for the survival of the nation. The American political culture obviously places a massive emphasis on personal freedom, individual rights, and the pursuit of individual wealth. But the foundational document of the government begins with the words, "We the people." The Republic was founded on a shared collective purpose.
And the ultimate lesson the article draws, which ties perfectly into everything we've talked about today, is that individual liberty, without a deep structural commitment to each other, leaves a society completely vulnerable to collapse.
If we tie this back to the macro themes of the entire deep dive, whether you are looking at a fractured political party desperately trying to purify its ranks in Texas, or a warring autocrat trying to mask his inflation in the Middle East, or a government trying to control the uncontrollable flow of AI hardware, the systems that actually survive, the ones that endure the chaos, are the ones that remember the Franklin rule.
It is a lot to process. We started this hour talking about the cutthroat trillion-dollar race for AI dominance. We talked about the intense obsession with exponential revenue growth and being a self-made billionaire. But it is profoundly moving to me that in a society that so heavily worships individual success and top-down control, the only thing we all universally agree to revere, the one single thing that cuts through all the partisan noise, is someone who completely throws away their self for the sake of the group.
Because intuitively, beneath all the posturing and the politics, we know that collective empathy is the only thing that actually keeps the whole fragile system intact when the Sunday night plan falls apart.
Wow. Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible grounds we have covered today on this deep dive. We started by looking at the illusion of control in the tech sector, where the U.S. government's attempt to regulate AI software through secret benchmarks is being completely outrun by the trillion-dollar physical hardware reality of the semiconductor boom.
We examined the folly of forecasting, watching the economists admit that their boldest predictions, like misjudging oil prices by ignoring domestic political realities and hidden Chinese reserves, are often spectacularly wrong.
Yeah.
And we saw how that same unpredictable human behavior haunts central bankers trying to regulate the $300 billion stablecoin market without understanding the mechanisms of smart contracts.
We traveled to the geopolitical chessboards of Turkey, Israel, and Pakistan, seeing how leaders use the loud theater of foreign conflict to mask the quiet, desperate reality of their failing domestic economies. We saw political parties in the UK and Texas grappling with their own survival, choosing whether to expand their tents through pragmatic adaptation or shrink them through aggressive ideological purification.
We broke down the mathematics of empathy, learning from Paul Graham that you cannot build a billion-dollar company without deeply understanding and serving the friction points of real people, much in the same way that a sports fan finds profound psychological belonging by giving their irrational loyalty to a team.
And finally, we ended on the ultimate expression of that belonging, the Medal of Honor, and the enduring truth that true liberty requires collective sacrifice.
Exactly.
To you, the listener. Thank you. Thank you for sending in these specific, dense, fascinating sources. You allowed us to paint a remarkably vivid picture of the world right now in July of 2026. You forced us to look past the breaking news alerts and actually examine the tectonic plates shifting underneath.
And as we close today, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over on your own time. We have seen today that technology is striving to perfectly simulate human intelligence. Algorithms and hyperscalers are working endlessly to predict our every market move, our every click, our every purchase.
They're trying to figure us out.
But as those machines get better and better at predicting the what of human behavior, is our messy, entirely unpredictable capacity for deep empathy and irrational self-sacrifice the why, the only thing that will ultimately keep humanity in the driver's seat of the 21st century.
That is a thought that is going to keep me up tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning the world around you, and please keep sending in your incredible sources. We see you next time.